Welcome back to the Sports Business Leaders Podcast. Today's guest is Matt Virtue. Thanks for joining the show, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Justin. Excited.
Yeah, excited to dive in here. So Matt is the founder and CEO of Rival, which is a sports technology company helping teams, leagues, and brands turn passive audiences into active communities through gaming, predictions, and interactive fan experiences. Rival works with organizations including the New York Giants, Baltimore Ravens, Detroit Pistons, Aston Villa, USL, New Balance, and Coca-Cola, helping them engage younger fans while creating new opportunities for data ownership, sponsorship, and revenue growth. Rival recently acquired social media gaming platform Shake and continues to expand its vision for the future of fan engagement. So, Matt, I know I said a bit about the background here, but would love to learn more about how you ended up here and the origin of Rival.
Yeah. Be happy to do so. And thanks again for having me on. My background has been in sports media, particularly since college. I played lacrosse, Middlebury College, and have a chance to go abroad. So as I was kind of working through prospective opportunities, I had been a paralegal the summer between junior and senior year and had insane to think about in retrospect designs to be an attorney in some capacity. Was fortunate to land a job with Liverpool FC during this very interesting transitionary kind of tumultuous period of the former ownership, Hicks and Gillette, who were going into administration, then being bought out by Fenway Sports Group. And I was working at the time for a guy named Christian Perslow, who was the managing director. So I did it more as a personal journey to get outside of my comfort zone and do something different outside the United States, what it turned into like a real labor of love and understanding kind of where the business of sport was headed. So that was my launching off point, became Fenway Sports Group, worked there for a little while, came back, worked for a boutique sports marketing agency called Fox Rock Sports, eventually joined a company called ANC that was acquired by Learfield. So a common theme here has been being a part of acquisitions, which were both personally and professionally very profitable to see like where, glass ceilings exist within the industry and then ultimately where, meaningful outcomes can be sort of derived. And then my last stop along the way was with a company called Horizon Media, which is a behemoth of a privately owned media buying and planning shop. They had a team, sports practice, sports buying practice, and ultimately something called a new ventures team, which focused on advancements in advertising and marketing tech. The core business for Horizon was investing around $2 billion on behalf of 100 or 110 Fortune 1000 brands. So we were sort of at the core epicenter of like where brand dollars were flowing and where they were seeing value. And, with the sort of sport bias lens, the idea was, well, where are fans gravitating towards? Where's the new opportunities? And if you can recall, this is sort of late 2010s into COVID. Video gaming had this renaissance. Obviously, it was a meaningfully strong business mechanically from the publisher side and from the hardware side with consoles and the like. But the new opportunity was around content, particularly streaming, and then as a byproduct of that, something called esport, which was meant to mirror that of traditional sport. And so, obviously, as brand buyers, we took an interest in understanding the space. What we found was massive scale, massive duration of time spent, certainly with a younger and growing audience. But what we didn't feel as much conviction around was how brands could extract real core value or business lift because it was so new. So as this is all happening, COVID happens, we find that there's this massive fan displacement. So what was a traditional opportunity to communicate through linear game broadcasts or obviously live events at ticket sales, those became difficult for 9 to 12 months. And so that was really the aha moment, was could there be a way of capitalizing on the titanic growth of the video gaming sector, marrying that with a passionate intersectionality of kind of like cultural relevance and fandom, and putting it into the hands of the teams and leagues and customers that we knew well to own that fan journey. Something that I think that had largely been untapped for the 4 or 5 years preceding. So that was the idea for Rival. You mentioned the acquisition of Shake and the arrival of Jack Kingsley and Spencer Lickenberg as a consequence. Over the tenure of this business, while gaming has been a strong fixture, we realized that there's a lot more to gaming or time spent for young consumers. So video gaming is still a behemoth, but ultimately the predictions market, sports betting adjacencies, the idea of like broader community tools that speak to fandom in a different way, how could that be verticalized and owned for our partners, in this case, sports teams, brands, and media companies? And so that was kind of the idea, the journey. Jack and I had known each other for well over 15 years. Jack was actually an intern of mine once upon a time. So felt like a perfect time to bring those organizations together. And I would say roughly a year in, it's been incredibly fruitful thus far.
Yeah, congratulations, number one, on just the growth. And you've been around for about 4 years, I believe.
That's right. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, so in 4 years, having partnerships with these marquee teams and companies like New Balance and the New York Giants, it's great, and I think you've done a great job of not only understanding what the problems are that Gen Z and a lot of the younger audiences are facing, but using the solution to engage the audiences at these organizations like the Giants. So, as we've talked about, Rivals built this impressive client roster. So, what problem did you see in the market originally when you started the company, and how are gaming and interactive experiences helping organizations really build deeper relationships with fans while creating new value for sponsors and partners?
Yeah. So I think it was firstly having an understanding of what teams did well, and I think legacy based opportunities, like we mentioned, so linear broadcast to the extent that they've cultivated social media followings, obviously ticket sales. I think those are great ways to interact and build unique experiences for fans. But in the advent of this kind of new tech era, what we deem to be like the second screen is actually becoming more of the predominant time spent. So I imagine you've been either to a live event or separate of and watching on television. It's quite, normal to notice that over 30, 40, 50% of that time of that game experience, people are on their cell phones doing many things, whether that's texting within a group chat, whether that's actually putting sports bets down, whether that's actually communicating on Twitter or social platforms. Like it's become inherently part of the overall experience. And so what Jack and I felt and had always aligned on even before organizations came together was that was the untapped opportunity, which was to own the second screen tied to your core product in a way that was value additive, not just to you and the organization, but ultimately to a lot of your stakeholders, particularly those brand sponsors who really want to be communicating with next gen audiences in an authentic way. So that was the problem we identified. I think on the buying side, from the team's perspective, those organizations have certainly put their finger on many, problems and have outlined kind of 3 or 5 year plans of where they want to invest. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they're very resource light when it comes to product and dev teams. And so what we've tried to be is both a utility tool, a software solution, and an operations team around that where they can outsource this hypothesis of what we're building to a team that feels like we can own this on their behalf with their collective input. Certainly, a lot of their marketing experience is tied to this, and obviously the incentives being a big part of this. But ultimately, how can we create the most frictionless outsourced experience to create that same ownable outcome of fan first and zero party data capture, ultimately down funnel conversion, and obviously increasing the probabilities for new surface area for brand sponsor integration. Those are core pillars of any team. And if you can do that in a way that's speaking to the 18 to 24, 18 to 20 or 34-year-old audience, you're well on your way. And that's what we felt like has been a great response from teams is that they agree that the world is shifting in terms of how fans interact with the IP. They're well baked into how those processes could play out, but ultimately, I don't know if they've created a formidable internal solution for that. So I think we do fit a real need.
And it's crazy to believe that even when a person's live at a game, they're 30%, 40% of the time on their phones, and it makes a lot of sense because if you think about people, like you said, texting, placing bets, doing fantasy. So, appreciate you putting that
It's
perspective
part of
on.
the fan experience. And I just feel like again, that's the white space. You need to own it in some capacity. I think if you were to ask the NFL or any league in particular, you mentioned fantasy. How do they feel in retrospect outsourcing the fantasy experiences to the media companies or CBSs and ESPNs? My belief, and I'm sure there's a lot of corroboration from those leagues, is that they should have owned that experience themselves. And by doing that, far better understanding who their core consumer is, what their fandom actually looks like, where their passion points lie, and obviously the opportunity as a consequence to convert them into other forms of buying habits. So that's where we want to be. Take a lot of these habitual things that extend into fandom and then put it back into the hands of the folks who are producing those experiences that they're, part of.
Right. And I don't know if there's ever really been a moment like this just in the whole landscape of fandom where you have this second screen that's taking your attention away, but at the same time, like you said, also enhancing the experience. TV was just one thing where you were totally focused on it and there was commercials, but I feel like what you talked about earlier with creating new surface area for sponsors, it's almost like you still have the linear, but then you're also including this new IP through the screen. So
Yeah.
it's cool.
It's not meant to be a replacement of anything that is providing value to these organizations. I think it's nuanced extensions of kind of the core experiences that they're building upon. You mentioned linear or radio or so. Largely those are like impression based advertisement experiences for the partners in these experiences. And I think ultimately what we're finding is that the age of new ad tech is focusing more on levels of engagement and not kind of core impression or CPM numbers. I think again, like there needs to be a real derivative look at business lift as a consequence of spend. And I think that's where, programmatic and obviously now social street, like there's a lot of ways to get a lot of direct recall on your product beyond just trying to message to young consumers. And so this is about creating one-to-one personalization with the millions or billions of fans, not just speaking to cohorts or prospective cohorts based on what they're telling you.
Yeah, and that's how brands can really deliver value and drive business is by creating that personalized, custom experience to a fan.
Yeah.
And the way I think about this is that you're really just creating a win-win scenario for the team and for the sponsors and for the brands. So I appreciate everything there. And then one thing that I wanted to really focus on here is just the fact that you're selling to these marquee teams and brands. And that's a big focus that we have at Sports Business Leaders. And one thing that I read up on you before this conversation, Matt, was just that you've said that roughly 60% of users on some rival activations are net new activations to the team CRMs.
Mhm.
So, for sports organizations looking to grow younger audiences, what are the biggest opportunities you're seeing? And what advice would you give companies trying to sell innovative fan engagement solutions to teams and leagues?
So yes, so our platform does act as kind of a fracking tool toward new younger audiences. uh, I want to be clear that those new younger audiences are in some way likely touching or engaging with their IP. How we look at it is the dissemination or distribution of that content has become so immense. So talked about there was a time where it was linear broadcast or radio, and that was the way in which you kind of interact or ticket buying. Social media platforms have provided an incredible unlock for teams. The difficulty there is those are third party platforms where the platforms themselves own the consumer data. So, distribution scale, there's a lot of value that can be created. What we feel like we're now doing is sort of taking those meaningful distribution points and sort of repatriating those consumers into an owned experience. So, that 57%, I think is the exact number, roughly per on average per community of net new users to these CRMs are largely people that they've been speaking to for some time, but just didn't have direct access to. The reason they skew younger, somewhere around 24 and a half years old on the platform, is that many of those young consumers do not have the discretionary income to make the transactions that put them into the overall CDP structure, mostly tied to ticket sales. So we feel like we are an exoskeleton build that is natively reaching young consumers by not asking for any habitual shift. They like to play video games. They like to sports bet. They like to do all these things. We're not seeking wallet share. We are very much trying to create an additive experience. Well, for you as the consumer, why would you do this? You love the Giants, or even you're passively a fan of the Giants, but you love the video game. You like to do these certain passion points. The idea is that when you come to the Giants gaming community, you can play. As you play, you earn. It's not just about gaming acumen. So we're definitely not like a distributed video gaming platform solution, of which there are many. The idea is not to just tout the best gamers. There are challenges and there's prizing, but ultimately your persistence and participation unlocks what we call tokenized value. So think of it more like a digital arcade. The more you play, the more you share, the more you earn. As you earn that kind of digital tokenized wallet share, like you would in digital arcade, you can then redeem for things. So tickets, merch, money can't buy experiences, sponsored goods, all of those data points then being owned by our customers to start to create these personalized profiles of who these young consumers are with the intention of moving them down funnel to eventually being first time ticket buyers. And once you've got them there, the likelihood of them coming back is quite high. So think of it no differently than a retailer, for example, like New Balance, who work with same idea holds. How do I meet these young consumers where they are, build a new cool experience for them, move them down funnel to purchase? Now I own them. So same idea here as to how teams should be thinking about this. I do think teams are sophisticated enough to see where this is going. I think the truth of the matter is they're generally resource light, and that's the opportunity as we see it. We do not want to create more work for those teams. If anything, we want to feel like we can lighten the burden. As they see more conviction around what we're doing, they'll probably apply more and more resources. We're seeing that with some of our customers. But ultimately, there's still like this speculative bet on effectively building experiences for young consumers. They get pitched tons of things throughout the year. I think, again, going back to kind of how we started the call, we want to be a solution plus an operating service to the extent that they want to be outsourced. So as they get more comfortable, they can certainly start to own the back end of this and manage it themselves. But I think, being a frictionless solution first and foremost is what the teams really want to see. So
Mhm.
that's our kind of our core pitch. Own the second screen in a way that is are more valuable than what it's currently being used for today. Use that to create much more clarity around your young consumers and what their behavioral traits are, create the profiles over time. That lifetime value creation will lead to a lot of positive outcomes.
Yeah, and that just creates to a better overall experience, and going back to what he talked about with the 24-and-a-half-year-old fan, like, why would they not want to engage with a video game and a professional team that they love? Those are 2 things that are, like you said, they're already doing, so I
Yeah.
think that it's great just that you're meeting the ICP where they're currently at. That's a common theme that we hear about all the time on the show with successful founders and people that are running businesses that are doing really well, just like Rival.
Yeah.
Um
And we're not the only ones doing this, right? Like ESPN just launched a fan hub as part, if you were to actually go and watch the World Cup within, or adjacent to within the ESPN app now, you'll see like more leaned in participatory based experiences. And the idea is like, this is so intuitive to young fans and to, honestly, to a growing fan base, that's well north of 24 as well. But that's ultimately where the power lies, is they're going to spend a lot of this time on this mobile device. There's easy ways to keep them there if the incentives are aligned. And I think ultimately that's what we're trying to pair, is this kind of broader loyalty ecosystem tied to passion points and habits. And to the credit of the teams, they have incredible inventory at their disposal to drive real, positive outcomes for a fan. And what we never want to be is a sports betting platform or a video gaming platform that's built around transactional two-way traffic, meaning we do not want traction coming out. This is not, you're not coming here to profit dollars and cents. The intention is it's one way. You connect, you earn, you spend, everybody wins in that scenario, from the consumer all the way up to the enterprise customer we work with.
Yeah, yeah, and I just keep going back, you mentioned FIFA earlier, just really how big this whole sports ecosystem really is. Shout out to Nelson, who's an SBL member, he invited me to the FIFA game, it was for France versus Iraq in Philly, and, it was just really eye-opening just to see how big sports really is, and I feel like these younger audiences, just like you said, are a lot of times not just interested in, like, let's say, one particular team. Like, I feel like a lot of these younger fans are more focused on players, and a lot of times that gives them interest in a lot of different leagues and organizations. The opportunity is huge, and appreciate everything you shared.
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
We've hit on a lot of great topics here, but in addition to what you mentioned, as you look ahead over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, how do you see this all evolving with gaming, fan data, community ownership, engagement? And what do you think these executives should be preparing for in addition to what we've already mentioned?
Yeah. So I think we're seeing flight of capital into sports team ownership that is no longer singularly focused as like a vanity asset. There are elements of that obviously still exist, but private equity, for one, is looking for alpha in these sports team ownership infrastructures. They're not just looking at it as an extension to a real estate opportunity or just the media rights deals. Like, they're going to try to optimize and modernize what have largely been mom and pop shops for some time. And so our point of view is that they're going to focus very singularly, at least for some time, on the first and zero party data aggregation tools. They have such a compelling product. They have such massive audiences, but they're very fragmented. The distribution is there for monetizing all those audiences, but ultimately, how can you again bring those experiences home to something that you can incubate and own yourselves? So we want to be that fracking tool. And then the second piece of that is, something we've discussed a lot, which is, how do fans now interact with the experiences? MLB and these are 100-year-old organizations and leagues, and they've had to shift with the times before. And I think now the real question is, in this age of entertainment dominance, where young consumers can be so easily pulled and stretched in different directions based on what's out there. You have the OTT platforms, Netflix. It's an endless flow of content. Social platforms, as we discussed, like, where can you get their attention? And ultimately, I think, again, we're not trying to be prescriptive or create gaming experiences. We're not trying to sort of put our finger in the air and say, this is where we think young consumers are going to want to game. We know they've defined those habits, right? We know that there's 90 million concurrent Roblox players a day. And we know that those audiences are only continuing to scale. We know that they're borderless. There's fandom, in our opinion, obviously, is very much global now. And so, how can you build experiences that are additive to both sides, with the teams largely getting much more personalized views of young consumers? And I think that that's really where this is all headed. Media rights are becoming challenging, right? For those of us who are NFL fans, you've been used to, for a decade plus, or prior to maybe the last 5 years, a decade plus, turning on a cable box, going to Fox Sports, CBS, yada, yada. the displacement of that across OTT platforms is not always good for the fan. And so ultimately, I think you're going to see some level of churn, or at least not the same kinds of early adoption of fandom that you would in the 90s and the 2000s. So again, that mobile device is very powerful. How can you make sure you have some market share of their time spent on that mobile device? And then how can you actually build something that's additive to them beyond the season itself? I think that's a big part of what we talk about is like if you're an NFL franchise with anywhere from 18 to 20 weeks of comms that are organic and authentic with your fan. They're, meaningful, somewhere around, 30-ish weeks where the fan is still the fan. And so how can you kind of continue to cultivate and build a relationship with that fan? And again, they've told the market there's a lot of publicly available data around how they're spending their time. We want to be one of the utility tools that attaches you to that kind of fandom, and ties it back to obviously the business mechanics and KPIs that make your business work.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's another big reason that you're successful, Matt, is just that you're not making up any information. You're literally just listening to what the market is telling you and building solutions around that.
Yeah.
So another great lesson for everybody in SBL.
You'll see. I mean, I think you already are seeing, but everything from the way new stadiums are developed, the footprint is incredibly different than it was a decade ago, right? Like you almost built stadiums where it was the theater and the arena was built to amplify the experience of what's happening right in front of you. Now it's like there's a million offshoots of like retailtainment and things that are actually have nothing to do in many ways with what's happening on the court or on the ice or on the field. So again, like, the attention economy, we're here. There's a lot of things to grab our attention. You got to make sure you kind of have like a multifaceted view of that. That's the live experience, but for us, we view ourselves much more of like the digital arena extension. What can be done in the hours in which they're not, within your footprint? And again, I think that's where we're going to live.
Definitely. Yeah, and just one last point on the fan experience, specifically in the stadiums. On the podcast and through our events and the membership, we hear about companies that are helping teams identify specific data points on fans that so that, let's say, through maybe a rewards program, they're able to, instead of giving fans just 15% off of a general merch, they're able to say, "Hey, Matt, you're sitting in this section of the stadium, then this booth is right next to you. You get 15% off of your favorite player's jersey." So it's just using data to get very specific. So that was just another example that I thought was similar to what you were mentioning there.
Yeah. We are big admirers of like this shift toward membership models and loyalty models. Our biggest, it's not even a point of contention, it's more of a wait and see for us, is that will the traditional credit card or hotel airline transactional loyalty model really play itself out favorably for the fan? And I guess we're not trying to compete with that idea. What we're trying to do is create loyalty not through consumption, but instead through participation. And that unlock does not have to come at the expense of the fan, right? And I think that's what fans have found is that like everything's become increasingly more complicated, more expensive, whether that's actually having access to the media content through an OTT streaming partner, buying tickets, whatever, merchandise. Is there not a way to create value for the fan that doesn't require any spend? And obviously that comes at the expense of somebody. It's not a zero sum game, but ultimately somebody has to underwrite that experience. Can our partners get more value out of it than they're willing to underwrite? And I think we feel like they can. And we're starting to see that obviously play itself out with Rival, where the loyalty construct is built around a participatory level that gets you to further amplify experience in a way that's additive to you. And as you move through that experience, there's a lot of personal data sharing and behavioral traits that are shared with the teams, which they feel like they can then monetize pretty quickly.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Matt, this has been really insightful today. Thank you again for being on the show. Any last words that you'd like to share with our SBL audience today?
You could find us at rivalx.com. I think we will have a couple of really exciting announcements on the business development front, fundraising front, for us. And, I would say anybody that's out there building their own business in the sports tech space, stay at it. It takes a lot of patience. I think the end buyer is competent and capable, but there's a lot out there. And so simplify your messaging. For me, people buy outcomes. You can have the best product on the block, but at the end of the day, it has to do something or at least have the real, there has to be real conviction mutually that can do something of meaningful value from a business back perspective. So make sure to define not just what it does, but what makes it work, for any of the organizations you're selling. But this has been great. And thanks for having me, Justin.
Thank you, Matt. And what's the best way for everybody to keep in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn or certainly Rivals on LinkedIn. We have our own podcast as well, to the extent that people want to hear. It's less to do with myself and some of the really exciting guests that we've had on. And then we have a newsletter distribution. You can always find that through LinkedIn as well. And if people want to email me, feel free, matt.virtue@rivalx.com. look forward to, continuing the conversation, obviously meeting others in this community.
Yes, sir. Matt, thank you again.